Hi, this is Leora Lanz, and you're listening to Marketing Mindset Lessons from Hospitality, the podcast where I speak with some of my amazing friends throughout the global landscape of hospitality and marketing. We will share best practices that you can use in your business, whether it's in traditional hospitality or not, whether you are an emerging leader in the industry, or seasoned and wanting to stay fresh and always learning. If you're an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, you need a marketing mindset. Whether you're marketing a business or yourself, we all need a marketing mindset. We know you're busy, but take a listen and figure out how you can apply this fresh thinking to your world, both professional and personal. Let's all think like a marketer. Welcome to Marketing Mindset, the podcast. I'm Leora Lanz, and today we're going to be talking about what are the expected skill sets in folks going into marketing. What are brands, companies, hotel companies, hospitality brands looking for? What are the different expectations of marketers today? And there's no better person to talk to about this topic than my friend from London, Chris Mumford. Let me share a little bit about Chris before we bring him in. Chris Mumford helps hospitality organizations succeed through the right leadership. His firm, Service Leadership Consulting, provides expertise in executive search, compensation consulting, and management due diligence on behalf of operators, developers, and investors in the hotel and gaming sectors. His work goes across Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. He's a member of the International Society of Hospitality Consultants, as am I. He also serves as a board advisor to the recruitment firm ISHC International, which I want to ask him about too. Having lived and worked in Germany, Japan, and New York, which is where we met, Chris now resides in London with his wife and two sons. And beyond hotels, he is passionate about anything that goes fast on four wheels. That is definitely Chris. Chris, welcome to the conversation. Hi.
Hey, Leora. Thank you.
Hi, Chris. Oh, it's so good to talk to you. It always is.
Nice to see you. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you for having this conversation with me. And we talk about marketing skill sets. First, I want to go back to you are a board advisor at ISHC International. Can you explain what that is? And then, of course, tell us what is Service Leadership Consulting. So let's start with LHC.
Sure. Yeah, so LHC is a recruitment firm that also focuses on the hospitality space, a little bit further down the org chart than where I operate, which is mostly C-suite. So they'll do property roles, for example, as well as director level corporate roles. And they've been around for about 10, 12 years in Berlin. They've since expanded into Spain, Dubai, and Bangkok. And my advisory role started with them about 5+ years ago. And it takes the shape of, a bit of gray hair advice. I mean, it's run by two MDs who are 35 years old, great guys, full of energy. And I help, to grow the practices, particularly with the Asia business. We've helped grow that one. But it's also, we collaborate on a lot of roles together. So it's a place that if there's something that comes through for one of my clients that isn't perhaps, I'm not best suited for, I can refer to them. Or we can, team up. And for example, we just worked on something in Spain where I needed the language component, the Spanish language component. So I worked with one of their team. So it's a very tight relationship, and we're trying to address, all our clients across multiple levels of need.
Which is really important. And I would imagine even more important today than ever before. I can only imagine. But let's talk about service, your company. Yeah. When we talk about the C-suite level, could explain to folks who may not understand the term C-suite. We use it all the time. So for us, it's a no-brainer, but I just want you to sort of define what does that mean? Who's in the C-suite? And from a marketing perspective, boy, there's a lot of new titles today, right? So I'd love for you to chat about service C-suite and the titles you're looking at.
Yeah, so C-suite is effectively the senior leadership group for a business, for a company. So it's typically, it's called C-suite because you have your chief roles, so chief executive, chief financial officer, chief commercial officer, chief operating officer, etc. And then, you have different titles, EVP, SVP, vice president of XYZ across the organization. So that's the sort of world in which I work in.
You're working with them, yep.
Yeah, and helping find the right talent for those roles on behalf of hospitality organizations. And the marketing one, so often that top role will be a chief marketing officer.
CMO.
We can talk about, sometimes it's CMO, sometimes it's just they kind of merged into chief commercial officer, and there's someone
Right.
overseeing who then has a marketing line as well as a sales, distribution, revenue management verticals. But obviously cascading then down, typically you'd have a VP marketing, you might have a brand lead, PR communications lead, digital lead, that cascades down throughout the organization. And then it's, do you need a regional infrastructure? Then cascading down to property level, unit level.
Right. Basically, to be a marketing person, you just mentioned there's public relations, there's digital, there's revenue management. There's so many aspects of it, which is why we are hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but we're hearing the term commercial for the last few years. It's at least 5 or 8 years, if not more, as part of the vocabulary for marketer roles, because it encompasses all of that.
I mean, it used to be, you remember you had this title, I think at one point, it used to be sales and marketing. Right. And then at some point that has moved to become commercial.
Right.
But essentially, what is that responsible for? That's responsible for getting, in a hotel's case, is responsible for getting, heads in beds and people in the restaurant and groups coming to stay and do conferences and all of that stuff. So it's everything in that ecosystem of how do we drive revenue,
Right.
And so there's obviously a lot of overlap with that. The marketing, traditional sales has kind of changed dramatically, right? Thanks to the way of the world and OTA and technology and
right.
The distribution channels. And the market, I would argue the marketing piece has become even more important to support that.
I'm glad to hear that. We'll get further into that in a moment. You definitely have a terrific sort of high level view of what's going on in the hospitality space, particularly from London, and the fact that you work throughout Europe, Middle East, into Asia. Mm-hmm. What's your perspective right now? It's 2026. What's your high level view of who's hiring in hospitality and what are they hiring for? What are you seeing right now from the searches that you're being asked to conduct?
Yeah, so I'd say talking at a macro level, things are pretty good. I know we've got some significant turmoil in the world and things going on, but that said, I was just at the International Hotel Investment Forum in Berlin last week, and the general vibe is pretty positive. And I think there's a strong belief that, certainly reinforced by COVID and the recovery, that the fundamentals of hospitality and travel are really strong. Okay, so that's not going, the demand for our business is not going anywhere. Now, it may take some knocks and have some dips, but the longer term game is, really positive. Obviously certain markets are up, certain markets are down with what's going on, but as I say, generally things are pretty positive, and there's a lot of investment appetite and money looking to be in the hotel space, which more so than it used to be in the past. Hotels has really become a more attractive, institutional investment class, which is also, very encouraging, good to see. Now, in terms of who's hiring, for me, what I'm seeing is kind of splitting into two worlds a little bit. You've got your big publicly listed companies who have enormous pressure every quarter to report net unit growth to their shareholders and to Wall Street. At the same time, there's huge cost pressure. So they're running a very thin line of trying to scale as quickly as possible whilst also containing cost. And you've seen quite a bit of restructuring. And right sizing, I suppose you'd say, of those organizations, which means there's not a huge amount of hiring going on.
That's what I was going to ask. It doesn't sound like that would be hiring at the moment.
Yeah, where I'm seeing the juice is small to mid-size enterprises, privately backed, on a scaling journey, leading towards an exit. So whether that's often private equity backed, right, but going on a 5-year path to lead to an event where everyone cashes out. And needing that's where a lot of my work's been the last couple of years, is putting the right leadership in place to be able to take a business on that journey. So let's, for example, taking it from what is now 20 hotels to 80 hotels in the next 3 or 4 years. Okay. Hopefully then they get acquired by one of the major hotel groups or another private equity group, etc. So there's a lot of that going on.
So with those kinds of trends, and with the hiring, let's say in this particular sector where it's more smaller collections of properties looking to sort of scale, from a marketing perspective, who are they looking to hire to help them grow? What kinds of marketers?
Well, a key part of this, a key part of that valuation is in a lot of these cases, it's the strength of the brand, right? So if someone's able to take this 20 hotel groups to 80, and they've got a brand with it that has a X factor, on the valuation, right? So
So
there's a lot of
branding,
emphasis around
branding is
brand.
key. Branding
Yeah,
knowledge and branding, the marketing of a brand is key.
yeah, and the authenticity of the brand, and the way that kind of is a rod through the organization. What does this
Right.
company stand for, etc. So that I'd say, from the marketing angle, someone who understands that a brand and how to scale a brand. I mean, we've just been working in
Yeah.
Asia with a group, again, privately owned, very successful concept in the kind of beach club, hotel, F&B, lifestyle, arts and
Okay.
culture place, and starting to expand with other sites. And actually, this was maybe answering one of your next questions, but they were
Sure.
looking for someone as a CMO who's had experience, growing a brand that's going from 1 to say 5 units, over the next couple of years, and in a very niche area of lifestyle,
Yes.
and actually wanted to bring in somebody from non-hospitality. So we're seeing a bit of that, right? So, and this is maybe the CMO role. I think that doesn't mean the whole team is non-hospitality, but in this case, they wanted somebody from a lifestyle group, like
Some kind of a parallel,
Michaels or Lululemon, or kind of
right?
brands
Like an
like this.
apparel brand or
Yeah,
something like that,
yeah,
that would be
yeah,
complementary or collaborative in some way. How do you feel
yeah.
about that when somebody's looking for a marketer in a hospitality company, but they want to bring someone in from the outside? What's the benefit of that? What's the disadvantage of that? How do you guide?
Yeah, I mean, you've seen
marketing
it. You've seen it happen a fair bit. I mean, if you look at other groups, Four Seasons, the chief commercial officer, is ex Google and the healthcare GSK background. There's the heads of marketing at Jumeirah, Aman, etc. From luxury, kind of more luxury retail, luxury goods. I think I'm a supporter of that. I'd like to see more of the inverse happening too, where hospitality talent is then attracted by some of those other industries.
Yes.
I think there's a and we have it's not just in the marketing arena. I mean, we've seen it at the CEO level as well. People coming in from particularly in luxury brands, and it's the reason they're attractive is because they understand the consumer from this luxury space, and as particularly that end of the market has shifted towards experience and experiential
Right.
travel. I think there's a lot, for example, in areas like retail and loyalty, right? So you look at LVMH and some of the brands they've got, and it's like, oh, how can we get some of that into the hotel world? So that's why we've seen some of that. So, but I that doesn't preclude obviously people from within the space going up into that world. But I do think, people with a broader set of experiences across perhaps different sectors, as opposed to just one silo, it can be beneficial.
Yes. Yes. With the brands that you're working with, what roles have generally been responsible for marketing, whether it's from the C-suite level or even with your work through LHC International, where it's more property level? Can you give us sort of a range of what's the profile of that person from a C-suite level and at a property
I think
level?
it is often that the C-suite is often bundled into this chief commercial role. So it's an understanding of brand combined with distribution,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the revenue management piece. So how do we yield the business? But that combined skill set that you see at the CMO / chief commercial officer end, and then but then often they've got experts in each of those fields supporting them,
Right.
working together to drive that.
And just to clarify for those who might be listening to this conversation or watching this conversation, when we talk about someone who's got the expertise in branding and scaling a brand to know the true authenticity of the DNA of a company so that it's genuinely connecting with its customers and fulfills a niche, fulfills a customer solution, that's the branding element. The distribution is the outreach. What channels can we find this brand on? When we talk about the OTAs or the online travel agencies, for example, as well as other mechanisms whether it's, collection brands, the preferred and the leadings of the world, just
Yeah,
how are we distributing our brand to reach our customers on a global scale? And
correct.
then you mentioned also revenue management and sales and commercial. So it's how are we actually generating the money a little bit more directly without sort of that group. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to know for these CMOs at the brand level, or at least enough to be dangerous. They need to know enough to be dangerous and bring the right folks in to help them sort of execute each of these specific disciplines. Am I right in
Yeah, and I
interpreting
would
it that
just,
way?
yeah, I think that's a great summary of it. I mean, I think the other piece is how do we do this profitably? So if I refer back to this client I just mentioned in Asia, in the lifestyle space, ultimately it's how do we become more profitable? Because,
Right.
relying on that OTA business is expensive, right? So how do we build our brand so we get more direct business? Because that's ultimately more profitable business, and that's what
Which is where the
that's what we're
branding
looking
comes
for.
in,
So,
because you want people to
and a
recognize the
marketeer
brand.
needs to understand that. Yeah, what is the call? What is the why are we doing this?
Right.
What's the purpose of this? Okay, it's to drive. Yes, at one hand, as I said, there's a the X factor maybe on the valuation of the business, but in the meantime, it's also how do we drive business in the most profitable manner into
Yeah.
our businesses, into our units.
We've talked about networking in the past, you and I, because you've been so kind to speak with students, not just with me for my Boston University students or my Essex students in France, but you've done this in other universities as well. From your perspective, as someone who recruits and someone who guides people who are emerging in the industry while you're also talking to seasoned people in the industry, how do you define networking, and what advice do you have for folks? What is networking? How should we look at networking? And I think you probably have a perspective that elevates how most people consider networking. So I'd love to hear from you on the power of that.
Well, I think the power of it is if you look at the amount of job roles that are filled by the likes of me and my, peers, it's very small. Okay, most roles are typically filled by, a company has an open role. They're like, well, who do we know? And who do we know? Who do we know? Who do we know? Is friend of a friend, a referral. Let's put our heads together and say, well, who do we know? Who have we worked with in the past, etc. Who could be right for this role? And that's how most roles get filled. Okay, and so it's not, and that's the power of the networking. So if you're not in that network, you're going to miss out on that opportunity. So that's, what does that mean? That means keeping in touch with people you've worked with
Right.
once you stop working with them, because you just don't know 20 years later. Again, it's a case in point, this Asia client I just keep talking about, that came through a relationship that I have had for 25 years with the senior, at the time SVP in the hotel industry, became a well-known CEO. I didn't get any direct business for 25 years from him, and then suddenly, the course of last year, referred me into a whole bunch of business. You just know, right? That's a 25-year relationship that is, if you want to look at it in ROI, it has really paid off. But that's why you need to be maintaining, these relationships, these connections. There's obviously more proactive things you can do around attending events and being part of community networks and those things to have your profile. And there's, you write so well in your book, about the marketing mindset is that personal branding piece too, which needs to be,
Right.
people need to pay attention to their own brand, not just the company brand, but what's your position in the sector? Are you being invited to be on a panel at a conference, for example, and therefore being seen as an expert kind of in your field? Those sort of things start to generate, interest and people following you. And then, as I say, often you get the call direct versus going through someone like myself.
Right. But then again, you did share a point. It might have been maybe an ROI didn't pay off for quite some time, but the truth is it turned into a relationship. It turned into a friendship, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, and I got much more out of it beyond the financial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's really what I also want to guide folks and young people who might be listening to this or watching this. To me, networking can seem transactional. It's definitely an activity we have to engage in. But when it turns into genuine friendships and authentic relationships, that's when it becomes meaningful on a personal level, and you never know where it becomes meaningful on a professional level.
I think if you're going into networking just to say, well, what can I get out of meeting you,
Right.
then it's not going to really
It's
last.
not going
I
to
think
work.
there needs to be genuine curiosity, interest in the other person, treat it as a learning exercise as well as, well, what can I give you? What can I contribute? It's a two-way street, right?
Yeah.
That exchange, to have a really true, authentic, relationship over time. And that doesn't mean you have to be, having dinner every quarter, or whatever, but you can maintain, contact quite easily. It can be as simple as seeing an article and just WhatsApping it to them and say, hey, you might like this, and then 6 months go by, but it's maintaining some sort of stickiness,
Yes.
and profile in the sector.
I think the opposite of networking is not working. So I think you have to make it work for you, actually. Chris, what advice do you have for seasoned people? Because times are tough for folks at senior levels too now. Job markets are difficult right now. We'll get to young people in a moment. For any seasoned people who've been around and been doing this, particularly in marketing, what advice do you have for those folks who are looking for other marketing roles or related roles?
Yeah, well, I always tell them to work their networks. I mean, they've got the benefit of 20 years in the industry, whatever. They've got a network to pull upon, and sometimes people are a little hesitant to do that, or they don't want to seem pushy, or kind of,
or desperate, right?
Or desperate, yeah. But I think there's a way in which you can do that in the right way. So to fully tap the network and ask around, because again, these friends of friends conversations that are going off, you just never know.
Right.
Continue to, and I see this quite a lot, which is great to see, but continue to innovate, continue to learn. If you're using that, if you're between jobs, use that time to go and, burn up on AI or whatever,
right.
Whatever
Upskill.
It may be, right? So to keep yourself relevant. And, maybe look for where your experience is most valued. So again, a lot of these smaller, fast scaling companies that I'm talking about, they're looking for people who've got way more experience, have been around bigger companies, know what it is to run a bigger company, and can bring that learning into their smaller shop. So it's about identifying all new markets, emerging markets. If you've got geographic mobility, don't be afraid to go to somewhere where maybe your skills are, more sought after than established, mature market.
That's great advice. That's great advice for seasoned people. And for younger folks who are emerging, particularly if I've got so many students, I want to go into marketing. Marketing, as we just discussed, just means it's such a breadth, it's such a scope. Yeah. So what advice would you have for young folks, how to upskill, where to upskill to be able to position themselves properly for some sort of marketing role today?
I would say, part of the thing with marketing is you need to understand the business, right? So you've got to have this holistic understanding of what is our business about. So I would personally, always recommend jump at any opportunity that's presented to you, even if it doesn't seem like an obvious direct route to where you're trying to get to. But I think the learnings along the way, even if it feels like a slightly lateral move, but that actually might benefit you longer term because you've seen expose yourself to something else. And I do think a marketing role is one where the more inputs you can gather is ultimately going to help your eventual output. So don't be afraid to go and try something that's in a different geography or in a different type of segment. For example, maybe you want to be in luxury, but maybe go and do that stint with a limited service brand and see how they do things, and vice versa. So I would be a real sponge in terms of just trying to seek as many experiences in as broad a sense as you can, while obviously keeping some sort of guardrails on the direction you want to travel in. And then, be marketing yourself, as I said, personal branding, get people's attention, in the right way. And just put, anytime there's an opportunity, put your hand up.
Yeah. Say yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Chris, any last piece of information or advice that you want to share when it comes to sort of marketing, marketers, what you're seeing in the space that you want us to leave?
No, I think, I think it's, as I said, the fundamentals are good. It's an exciting time. I do think there are things hospitality can learn from other sectors. I've just, case in point, I had a experience at an outlet mall with a luxury apparel brand, and the service in the store, as well as the after service electronically and also with a phone call, is beyond anything I've ever received from any hotel.
Wow.
And it's like, okay. And this is an outlet. This isn't even the main flagship store.
Amazing.
And it's beyond being on a marketing database and getting spammed with email. It was done so well. So there's a lot, our world
We can learn.
continue
Yeah,
to learn.
we can learn.
And I think, we also need bright young people who are hopefully interested in the space. It offers great opportunities as an industry. So, hopefully the more young people we continue to come in, the better. But you've got to stay agile and nimble and continue to adapt. And I think marketing, again, is one of those areas where you need to really be on your toes as to what's coming next, not just how we're doing things today, but what do things look like down the road?
I couldn't agree more. Just keep reading, keep learning, and just stay on top of things to be able to be useful and productive. Chris, thank you for taking the time to do this with me.
Pleasure.
Have this conversation.
Thanks, Leora.
I always love it. Thanks so much.
Likewise. Fantastic. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Marketing Mindset, Lessons from Hospitality. Marketing Mindset is a production of Think Tank Media and the Hospitality Nexus, the global platform for hospitality education, with resources such as podcasts, articles, and video tutorials. I'm your host, Leora Lanz, and if you want to learn more about how we can work together, visit my LinkedIn at Leora Lanz. Remember to order a copy of my debut book, the international bestseller, Developing Your Marketing Mindset, Real-World Lessons from Hospitality, which also won the Business Book of 2025 award from the New England Book Festival. And the newest in the series, the companion book, Marketing Mindset in Motion, inspired by hospitality. Everything you need to think like a marketer for your business, your service, or yourself. Connect with meaning through wellness, sustainability, and community to market with meaning and remember the hospitality. Until next time.